Alright, so then this is pretty much what I'm getting at. So I think we'll finish with the uterine tube. So the uterine tube is also known as the fallopian tube. I mean, you hear this, we probably have heard of this term. So it's definitely worth knowing that when I say fallopian tube, or I'm referring to the uterine tube, or sometimes called the salpinx as well. So, but I think this is like one of the more common terms, fallopian tube. And what does that do? That connects the uterus to the ovary. And then in the time we have left, let's talk about oogenesis. So what we have here is that we have these oogonia, which are the stem cells of oocytes, which will eventually develop into the ovum and eggs. Now the thing about oogenesis in the female reproductive system is a lot more complicated than spermatogenesis. So what happens is that we have the oogonium, and through mitosis you can generate multiple oogonia. So the thing is that once you're so why do they experience menopause? Why can't women produce ova and ovulate throughout their entire life cycle? Well, the thing is that at birth these oogonia stop undergoing mitosis. So before you're even born, and if you're a female, you're going to be born with all the oogonia you'll ever have. So all these oogonia will have been developed into something we call a primary oocyte. Now this is why, again, women have a limited amount of ova, because without mitosis you can't regenerate these primary oocytes. So what happens is that they actually stay held in this phase for a while. So what happens is that before birth, they're stuck in this prophase 1 of meiosis 1. So they're not dividing yet. But what happens is that the female body hits pause on these primary oocytes until puberty. But once a female undergoes puberty and becomes sexually mature, then you unpause this prophase 1, and now these oocytes can undergo meiosis 1. So what happens during ovulation is that one oocyte at a time, it splits into two, and the split is not equal like we see in spermatogenesis. So you have a primary oocyte and it splits off into two. It does divide the genetic material in half, but this polar body barely has any cytoplasm. And this secondary oocyte, it pretty much keeps most of the lion's share of and most of the cytoplasm and organelles and all the contents of the cells. This polar body, it has half the DNA but not much else. So this is why this polar body cannot be fertilized, but this secondary oocyte can be fertilized. So what happens is that this secondary oocyte, when it gets fertilized by a sperm, then it's going to actually divide the genetic material by half again, and it's going to generate a second polar body. So this part with the second polar body actually doesn't occur until fertilization occurs. So again, these polar bodies, these are dividing the genetic material in half, but what we have here with the leftovers is that this oocyte is keeping most of the cytoplasm, organelles, proteins, and everything that was in the original cell, compared to these polar bodies, which can't be fertilized because they don't really have much material other than their DNA to work with. So they can't undergo the replication and cell division that we would see in a fertilized oocyte. Alright, so I think that's a lot for today. I think I'll cover the ovarian cycle and the menstrual cycle next week when we talk about that. So the menstrual cycle, again, it seems complicated, but it's actually really cool because it explains a lot of things. Do estrogen and progesterone have effects on the psychological well-being? Yes, they do. But again, we've made advances in endocrinology and gynecology to figure out that it's not due to some crazy wandering womb or lack of stimulation. It's due to the psychological effects of hormones on the brain.